Hey everyone, welcome back to Reading with Tatiana. Today I'm going to do a book review on this memoir I finished called Even After All This Time by, I think I'm going to butcher her name, but when I Google how to pronounce her name, this is what it comes with.
Afschineh, Latifi.
So I think the first name is right, and that's Afschineh. And Google says it's Latifi, but I think it's Latifi because it's a Persian last name. So yeah, the author, her story is Afschineh, and it's a pretty good book. Um, I memoir is probably one of my favorite genres when it comes to books, just because I love reading about people's stories, and it's really cool when it's usually from their perspective. And I find that memoirs are also usually has to do with them overcoming some form of adversity. So I really enjoy reading that. So before I get into the book review, I would appreciate if you took some time to give this video a thumbs up, leave a comment below whether you read the book or if you had any feedback for my type of reviews, and also if you can subscribe as well. So before I start talking about the memoir, I want to talk a bit about Afschineh. So when I Google her, I kind of like to talk about the author before I get into the book. So when I Google her, it was kind of cool to see that she is still a practicing lawyer, and that's what she's known for. And that was interesting to me because I find that um, people who have overcome a lot of adversity to do a lot and succeed in a new country, a lot of times I find they would have written a book that maybe they become a TED Talk person or motivational speaker. But for her, once you read this book, her passion is in law. So it's really cool that when you Google result her, you only really see her the law firm that she became a partner at, and also just Google Amazon sites to buy this memoir versus like about her upbringing or her backstory. So it kind of makes me like it reminds me to think about how when you see people at work or in school or in your life that you don't really know what's going behind the surface and how far they've come to get to where they are. So always have an open mind and have a lot of I guess compassion when you interact with people. So currently she still lives in New York City, and she specializes in intellectual property law, which she talks about in the book and how she got into that. So yeah, I thought that was cool that when you Google her, it's not about her past or about how she got to where she is, but it's just about who she is as a person right now. So I do want a disclaimer that before I get into this book, that it's kind of impossible for me to not give any spoilers. But I don't think that takes away from you reading the book because it is a memoir. It's very factual. There's no like twists or sudden plot changes. So I think it is a must read because after reading this book, it really changed my perspective on immigrants and also my life as well as someone who is born in a first world country in Canada. The book is set in America when they immigrate to America and how they struggle and how they succeed. But I feel like Canada is very adjacent to American culture, so this book is a must read, I think, for anyone like me. So the story begins in the Iran Revolution. So to give a bit of history, that was in the late 70s, early 80s. And then basically up until the revolution, the Iran was ruled by the Shah, which is the king, and it brought a lot of progress to Iran during this time. And then this man came called Ayatollah who returned, and he wanted to bring Iran back to what it was before. So from a Western perspective, it kind of went backwards, and that's really because it was kind of like a religious regime, and also because it had a lot of like patriarchal focus on society. I'm not saying that it's right or wrong, but just from that perspective, it was backwards. So, I mean, I feel like the Iran Revolution could be a whole discussion into itself. And to be honest, as a Canadian, I didn't know too much about it before reading this book. That's like that area of the world has always kind of been like the Middle East. So I'm not well versed in it, but I did a lot of Wikipedia reading while I read this book because I felt like I needed a lot of context especially when they gave names like Ayatollah or the Shah, and I didn't really know which side is which. But having said that, this region of the world has a deep history of conflict and power struggles and corruption going back and forth. So I don't really want this video to get too political, because if you have any hesitations reading this book, even Afschineh, she doesn't get too political herself. Like, this memoir herself is really about her experience and her family's experience, more so much about instead of talking about the Iran Revolution and where her family stands. So I feel like if you have any hesitancies about reading this book because of maybe where you stand politically, I don't think that really matters, because it's really like a personal interest story about her life. So within the first 10 pages, the story starts with about when Iran was ruled by the Shah. Her dad served in the army as a colonel, and when Ayatollah came into power with his regime, his dad was taken as a prisoner for no reason really, except for that he was a colonel under the opposing regime. And within a few months, his dad was tortured, and he was deemed as an enemy of God. So in the book, like, Ayatollah, the new leader at the time, they would put pictures or name people who are enemies of God. And then his dad was tried for something that he was not guilty of, had valid alibi, and then he was executed. So that's how the book starts. And then the dad also left a will for the mom, and the mom was a widow at 35, had 4 young kids, one of them obviously being Afschineh, the author, her older sister, Afschineh, who was a year older, and then 2 younger brothers, Ali and Amir, who were like 5 or 6. So at this time, like, the mother saw that the country that she was born and raised in and now raising her kids had vastly changed. So her mother was like, how can I help my kids so they have a future? Even though, like, maybe she wanted to stay in the country because that's all she knew, but she could see that for her 4 kids, there was no certainty of a prosperous future. So the first thing the mom does is send the 2 sisters, Afschineh and Afschineh, to Sacre-Cœur in Austria. And during this time, it's kind of like a boarding school, and there were kids from all over Europe to go to attend this boarding school. And like, here it's cool because as someone who grew up in North America, I have no exposure to Persian culture or European culture. So it was really cool to see Afschineh's impressions of being a foreigner in Europe, because Europe is very diverse. And during this time, the mom could only call the girls once a week from Iran. So it was pretty cool to see her struggles, because something that I've never experienced, being away from my mom. And just imagine if you were sent away from the country that you were born and raised in, and then you had to go to this foreign country where you didn't really know the language, and then also you could only talk to your mom once a week on the phone. Like, there wasn't internet or like smartphones back then. So it was really cool to learn and see that experience, or read about that experience. So without a spoiler, for reasons in the book, basically the 2 girls couldn't continue attending school in Austria. So the mom had to find ways to keep the girls educated outside of Iran. So I feel like this memoir, like, up to this point, was just kind of a lot like backstory, and then the real story starts when they leave Austria, because the 2 girls are then sent to America. And I really feel this book is like a coming to America story. And for me, I feel like anyone that's kind of like not very supportive of immigration, or feel like immigrants don't really pull their weight, like, this book about this family specifically really shows that immigrants are really hard workers. So they come to America, and the reason why the mom sends them to school to America is because their uncles and the mother's brother has family in America. Family is in America, and then also in America, school is free, which is interesting because in Sacre-Cœur in Austria, they had to pay for it. So I thought this was really fun, because when the girls arrive in America, they're in high school, and in the time in America where they were, it wasn't as diverse. So they were really the only like non-white people, aside from some black people. Like, the only diversity back then, this is in the 80s, is that you're either white or you're black, and there was like no like other foreigners really. So it was really cool because they were to hear about their experience being the odd ones out, even their experience having the opportunity to get a job in America as a high schooler, because I feel like For me, as soon as you turn 16, you get a job, and it's really like, from like a North American's perspective, it's very normal. It's very coming of age. You have your first job at retail, at McDonald's, at KFC. So it's really cool that these two girls, her her perspective was, it's amazing in America that you even have the opportunity to work when you're a kid, because in Iran, I guess there wasn't that opportunity to work. So that was kind of cool to have like that, like, oh, like I feel very fortunate that we were able to have that independence at a very young age. Um, in this book, it's also very like fun to hear her and her sister's experience about like fashion in high school, or the commentary on dating, because like when in their culture, it's very proper, and it's not arranged per se, but like if a male was interested in a woman, he would ask his mom to talk to the woman's mom to set up like a formal meeting. Whereas like in America, it's very casual, it's very dating. I would say most of the time the parents aren't really involved until, or unless it gets more serious. So it's kind of cool to hear their impressions of dating, but they don't do it like until way later. And then also like even their commentary on prom, and just like, like the way they learn the culture, because something that seems cool maybe on TV or maybe a stereotype of America, when they try it, it seems very out of place. So for example, the older sister, she sees that cow boots are very American, so she wears them to school, but it's very out of place. um, and to add to the observation of how they feel kids are so lucky to be able to work in America, one thing that's obviously relative to this booktube is Afschineh finds that, or discovers that there is a thing called libraries, and it's free to rent books, which is like very, I feel very lucky that we have that, because I guess in a lot of countries around the world, that's not something that's either free or not accessible, and it's just like assumed that you would buy books, or maybe get from school. So it's cool that, something as simple as libraries that I take for granted is something that they really appreciate in the book. Or for example, like, I feel like growing up, I had a situation where my mom didn't drive, so I just learned to walk or bus everywhere. It wasn't really a big deal. But I have a lot of friends that grew up with parents driving, and if their parents didn't drive them, they just wouldn't go. So one thing that was also very humbling for me in this book was when the older sister gets a job. She walks 5 miles to work because she isn't able to get a ride. But they don't really see it as like a complaint or something that's unfortunate. They just see it as that's just something that you have to do to get to a goal you want to achieve. And that's kind of like a lesson that like permeates through the whole book that I really admire for this family. And I kind of like apply to all immigrants, because like I feel a lot of immigrants don't necessarily choose to leave their country, either because there's turmoil, or maybe there's better opportunities in the country they're immigrating to. And I feel like, they have a goal, and they never complain. They just do what they need to do to ensure security or stability for them or their family, and that's really admirable. Whereas I feel like for me and like my I guess network, like we complain a lot, and this book really reminds me to be more grateful for my life and for opportunities that we get so easily. So what I like or what I didn't like in this book. So this book, because like I said, they are in Iran, and then they flee, and they go to Austria, they go to America. In the book, I believe at one point they even go to France, and they travel all across America. And wherever they went, there was always the sense of a Persian community. So in the book, I mean, this is also like set in the 80s and 90s, so maybe it's different now. But like back then, when the mom went to this new city and they didn't know anyone, they would just get a phone book, look for a Persian name, call them up, and that Persian person would be so accommodating and welcoming, and they would make these new friends in this new city. And I feel like that's something that you wouldn't do now. Or I feel like maybe because I'm Chinese, and I live in a very Chinese heavy city, so like in the phone book there'd be so many of us. But maybe if I moved somewhere where there were no Chinese people, I could call them and be like, hey, like I'm new to the city, like can you help me out? But it's just really cool to see the sense of community in this book throughout their whole lives. And I don't know if that's just a Persian vein, or if it's just like an old veins versus modern vein. Like I feel for me, sense of community is very different. So this book made me really reflect on that, and I really enjoyed that, because it made me think about how the communities I'm part of with my family or with my friends is very different. And I feel like I have the power to create what communities I want to. Whereas like in this book, I feel with their family, the communities were kind of like not given to them, but it's kind of like expected that because of your culture that you'll always have a community wherever you go, as long as there's also a Persian person there. So I thought that was like kind of cool. Um, so I also liked how, like I said a few times already, that there's a lot of sacrifice in this book from everyone in the family, and they never really complain because it's just something that you have to do, and that really resonates me. Even though I'm born in Canada, but I kind of have that immigrant mindset from my family. I think because like my family immigrate from China and Hong Kong, and I kind of see that in contrast to people who are maybe born here and just they complain more. So just again that contrast between that mindset on life. And then one thing that I really like in this book, in page 230, is so in the book they learn different languages, like English, obviously. The other thing I thought was really cool was they learn language by watching sitcoms on TV, which I have learned from lots of friends who have come from other countries to Canada. That's the best way to learn a language because there's a lot of nuances, a lot of humor that you can't really get from learning from school or a book. So it's kind of cool that even in this book set like 20, 30 years ago, that's the best way to learn a language. So I feel like if I were to ever learn a language, I would probably want to watch a show in that language. So a quote from this book I really like was the mom said, every language you learn makes you a stronger person, but to forget your mother tongue is to forget your roots, and the true roots will not stand. So I thought that was like a really beautiful quote because I feel that's very true. Like, I feel like every person, if they're able to, should learn a second language or even more languages because your language can only observe the world in a certain way, and when you learn more languages you can see the world in many different ways. So I thought that quote was really nice, that yes, every language makes you a stronger person, but you should also never forget your roots as well. So I also really like, again, their perspective on how there's so many opportunities in America. So for example, like I think one thing that's common now in modern times is it's crazy in America how you have so many student loans and it's so expensive, and once you get your degree you can never get out of your student loans. But in this book, and again it's set like 30, 40 years ago, so it's maybe different in student loans, but they said it's amazing that you have an opportunity to even have a loan so that you can even go to school. Whereas I think maybe in Iran that you need the money first before you can even explore opportunities, or even in their society it's very limiting to what you can do. So I thought that was really cool. And then the quote that from that section was, and they feel that in America that the opportunities are always there if you have the will to pursue them. And like I really like that in this book, like I said before, Afschineh is a lawyer now, and in the book when she got her law degree and passed her bar exam, she had a hard time getting a job. But instead of having any jobs that were beneath her, even though she was trying to get jobs at law firms, she still became a waitress in the daytime just so she can make ends meet. So I find it very admirable that she kind of saw it as, even though it wasn't the right opportunity, there's still an opportunity to make money and to also like help her family. I also like the commentary on this book on how, because they live in a big city, New York City, but also live in smaller cities like Norfolk and that kind of stuff. I forgot which state that was in, but I really like the observations in big city versus small city in USA, because when she lived in a small city, she kind of stood out, and she was kind of like that person that everyone's interested in, and she didn't like that. But then when she moved to New York City, it's kind of awesome how in America there's that opportunity to either stand out if you want to, but then also in New York City she could just blend in and just be one in a million in the crowd. So I thought that was really cool, that observation that versus like if you live in a different country, whereas in America or even in Canada it's so ethnically diverse, you can really decide how you want to blend into the country. And then one thing I really like about the book as well is in the end of the book, the Afschineh and her sister kind of realize why her mom holds on to them so much and kind of wants to keep them safe for so long. And the realization that she has is because her mom went through a lot of trauma. Like her mom had her husband executed and charged wrongfully in his own country. And when Afschineh realized that her mom holds so tight to them because of this trauma she had, it made me realize like that's maybe why I feel about my mom too. Like my mom, she really holds tightly on to me because she's gone through stuff in her past. So I feel like this book had a lot of like good commentary and observations for that I could bring to my life about how I interact in society, in my communities, and also my relationship with my mom. Because in this book, her and her sister had a lot of struggles and a lot of closeness with her mom, and I thought that was really cool. And also, like when they came to America and they want to assimilate into this new culture in America, their mom was still in Iran, and like their mom didn't really understand why they want to change and shift. So I had a lot of that conflict too, being born in Canada but being raised by an immigrant parent. So this book kind of made me have a lot of understanding because it was kind of parallel but different perspectives. So like an example in this book was when her and her sister want to shave their legs, and her mom's like, "Why? That makes no sense." So just kind of stuff like that. Um, Things I didn't like about the book, because even though this book is a 5 out of 5 for me and a must read, I feel for anyone, there's always room for improvement. So I guess one thing about this book was it's written very casually. It almost feels like a story told by a friend, which can be good, but I feel a lot of times she ramble, or she had like some examples that didn't really matter. But again, for me that was a positive because I feel like it was kind of like talking to a friend, and it was very like I just was really into their story, so I feel like she could give me every detail about her life. So yeah, so the reviews on Goodreads is this book got 4.06 out of 5, which I think is pretty high and average on Goodreads. Some of the reviews said that it was very riveting, it's a beautiful story, goes to show you what perseverance can do and how to come and persevere against adversity. Some negatives were just about the validity of her stories and her experiences, which I think is pretty common with memoirs. Like when I read A Long Way from Home, which was about a boy soldier in Africa, and also this other book, I think it was called Something in the Tall Grass, which is about like a Cambodian person who survived the Khmer Rouge. I find that a lot of negative reviews on memoirs is just question the validity of the stories, because again, you have to think that a lot of these stories are written in their perspective and it's very personal. So I guess you can see when you think about the history of things, which is very factual, I would say, then it might not be in line with the timing, or maybe the perspective is like not doesn't go in line with the history of that event. So that's a very common negative review. So I feel if you see those reviews on Goodreads, it shouldn't deter you from enjoying the book, because you should kind of see it again like it's not political. You should enjoy it as you're reading about someone's story and their life experience. So why I think you should read this book. So I think you should read this book if you've ever read Pachinko, which is a fictional book, but also kind of covers a family in Korea and their experiences through decades. So I kind of like that because it kind of reminded me of that book. So if you like books that like kind of start with a story of a family, just follow them through their lifetime, I really enjoy that. And then I guess if you want to learn about like an immigrant's experience to America, and then especially in this case, someone had to flee their home country, and claim political asylum. And for me, I said again so many times, I'm Canadian, but I feel it's really adjacent to American culture, and like it's just really cool to read about someone coming to America and their observation for things that are very second nature to me, or things I never question, and just them being like, oh, like that's wild, or that's rad, or it's not very logical. So it's kind of cool to read about those people's perspectives. So again, one of my favorite things I like to ask people when they read a book is to ask them how a book made them feel, because sometimes when I read a book years later, I won't really remember the title or maybe what happened in the book, or especially the character names or that kind of stuff, but I'll always remember the feeling the book gave me. So the feeling this book gave me, which maybe is a weird word, but let me explain, is it made me feel very privileged. And why I picked that word was it made me feel very privileged for my upbringing. I'm so fortunate to have so many things that were silver spoon to me growing up, and to follow this family through the decades of fleeing Iran, coming to America, and building a life, and all being very successful individuals. It made me reflect on how lazy I kind of am, because my life hasn't been very hard, and I'm not failing in life, but I'm not like crazy successful. So like this book made me very made me feel very privileged for my position and my experience so far. And, you know, it made me feel very grateful I haven't had too much trauma, and also made me realize really that people made me really appreciate or really like commend people who have a lot of trauma and have been very successful. So I guess in this family, they really stuck together, really persevere, and yeah, so it made me feel very privileged. So yeah, so that's my book review. I definitely think it's a 5 out of 5. You have to read it. If you have read it or you're going to read it, leave a comment below on what did you think. Did you enjoy the book the way I did? Do you find it frustrating that she went on too many tangents all the time, and that kind of stuff? So yeah, so right now my next book, I'm already about halfway through. This is an easy book. It's called The Humans by Matt Haig. I think he's pretty popular right now because last year he came out with a book called Midnight Library, which was just like an okay book, but I can see how it's good if you read it during a certain time in your life. But this book is really funny. So basically, it is an alien who has overtaken a human's body. So it's pretty funny so far because there's so many times I actually like laughed out loud because the observations he has on humans, it kind of makes you think, why do we do things the way we do? So yeah, so that's my review, and here's my next book. Let me know if you're going to join, and I'll do a review shortly for this one. And yeah, so I'll see you guys next time. Bye.